Hello, how are we doing? My name is Aisling, and as ever, you're very welcome here. I'm going to talk to you today about books, and specifically, we're going to do my top 10 books of 2023. So, I have finished over 100 books this year, which is absolutely mind blowing to me. But it's not about the figures, it's about quality over quantity. And I actually haven't had that many favourite books this year, sadly, so it's been a little bit difficult to choose this list. But when I looked back through the year, I definitely did have some fantastic reads. So without any further ado, I'm going to get cracking. So, my 10th most favourite book of this year was Panenka by Ronan Hessian. This is a contemporary literary fiction novel. It is a stunner. We follow a man who is an ex-professional footballer, and his name is Joseph, but he is more colloquially known as panenka, which apparently is a football thing, but I wouldn't have known that because I'm not a football fan. Before I go any further, I will mention that you don't need to be a football fan to read this book. This book is not about football. So anyway, we follow Joseph, and he's aged 50, and he's essentially lived in exile for the majority of his adult life. He made a mistake during a football game in his 20s, and it has had a profound effect on his life. But in this book, he has begun to rebuild a relationship with his daughter and her 7-year-old son. But also, then Panenka suffers from these really bad headaches or migraines that are just so all encompassing, so horrendous to live with. He calls them his iron mask, but he keeps it to himself. He meets a woman named Esther who comes to the town. So he lives in the town that he kind of was born in and was brought up in. And she comes to this town to kind of escape her own disappointments. And we see them find resonance in each other's experiences. It's a really sad but really beautiful read. It's such a stunning read. It's quite short as well, which I love when you find a book that says what it needs to say in a really small amount of pages. I just found this book particularly lovely, and it is really a recommendation from me. And then something a little bit different. So number 9, then we have a book called Our Wives Under the Sea. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the author's name, but it will be, of course, in the little image here beside me. We follow two women, so one named Mary and one named Leah, and Leah went basically on a deep sea mission that was supposed to take a couple of weeks, but ended up taking about 6 months. There were a lot of problems with the project. They lost communication, nobody really knew what was happening. And when Leah returns, she's in some way just profoundly changed. She's not herself at all. She's a completely different person. And she's just entirely unlike the woman that left. This is a story that's kind of about falling in love. It's about loss and it's about grief. It's actually classed as a horror novel, but I wouldn't personally call it a horror novel. It's not scary, it's just a little unsettling. It's got a bit of body horror going on in it, so do keep that in mind in case it's a thing for you. It's very readable, but it's very uncomfortable, but it's more literary than anything, and it's absolutely stunning. Like, the prose is really on point. Julia Armfield is her name. There we go. It's a lovely book. It's really unusual. It's a story that I have never read before. I've never read anything like it. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it, and I would recommend picking it up if you have a little bit of time to get to it. Number 8, again, is something completely new to me, completely strange, but in the best way. So it is a book called This Is How You Lose the Time War. So this book is really difficult to describe. So it's a love story. It's like this epic love story that spans space and time. And we witness a correspondence, so letters being sent between two rival agents who are kind of hell-bent on securing the best possible outcomes for either of their warring factions. The discovery of this correspondence would probably mean certain death for the two of them because they're hated that much. They're fighting each other. They're not supposed to be in cahoots with each other at all. So this is a sci-fi book, and for the first half of it, I've said this before, I really was like, I don't get it. I didn't get it. There was a world, a really intricate, unusual world. There was this war, there were these characters, and I didn't understand where they were coming from. I was like, where's the world building? Where's the explanation? So, like, maybe about a third of the way through reading this book, I actually Googled, like, do you get any answers? Do they explain what's going on? And actually, no, you don't really. So once I knew that, then I was able to just be like, all right, okay. And I just completely threw myself into it, was whisked away by it, and really ended up loving it. You just have to sit back and allow this book to take you where it goes. And that's when it really sings. You're not really going to get that background information that you kind of crave a little bit. Just don't expect loose ends to be tied up. Don't expect any ends to be tied up. It's just something that's truly original. It's not like a romance book. It's not like a normal sci-fi book. It's not like a normal literary read. It's something really unusual. And I can see that this one could be very divisive. I could see a lot of people not liking this book, but I thought it was just incredible. Just so new, so novel, so bizarre, but beautiful in its bizarreness, and I loved it, and I think some of you might too, so give it a go. It's again another short one, so you won't have to invest too much time into it either way. Number 7 is something a little bit different. So this one is a romance, and it is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. And I do believe that there is a sequel or a book set in the same world to be published by this author in the next few months as well. So do keep an eye out for that. So this anyway is a novel that I listened to on audiobook, and when I listen to audiobooks, I normally am walking. That's kind of my time for audiobooks. This is a novel about found family, and that is always one of my favourite tropes. So we follow Mika Moon. Mika Moon is a witch, and she lives in England, I think. She has to keep the fact that she is a witch quiet. She's not allowed to tell other people. So she knows other witches, and they do meet up, I think, once a year or so. But they're not allowed to spend too much time together because their power becomes noticeable and people might figure them out, and so on and so forth. But Mika does maintain a social media channel, YouTube potentially, where she makes videos where she kind of pretends to be a witch, but she actually is a witch, but there's no way for people to know that she's a witch. The other witches are a little bit about it, but she's not doing anything wrong, so all is well, all is well. So Mika lost her parents at a young age and was raised by another witch who was actually quite cold, maybe not the most warm woman, and she's normally quite good at following the rules and doing what she needs to do, but she feels a bit lonely, naturally enough, I'm sure. And she eventually receives some correspondence from somebody, and they have spotted Mika on her YouTube channel and have said, hey, this girl could be the answer to our prayers. So she has received this correspondence from somebody in a house called Nowhere House, which is a lovely house kind of in the middle of nowhere. And this house has 3 young witches in it, and then a small amount of staff there to look after the house and to look after the witches. But they don't know what to do with the witches. They're not witches themselves. They don't know how to nurture them. They don't know how to care for them. They don't know how to nourish their gifts. So they're asking Mika to pop along and to help out. She goes, even though it does break all of the rules, and she quickly becomes entangled not only in the lives of the 3 young witches, but also in the lives of the other staff in the house, and she develops a lovely little romance with the librarian of the house. As somebody who doesn't really read kind of romance books, I thought this was really much more than tolerable. It's really whimsical, it's really sweet and silly and wholesome. There's also a little bit of swearing going on in there, so it's not too sweet. It balances everything out nicely. I just thought it was really well done. I really loved it and I cannot wait for the next book. So next then on the list is number 6, and that is Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. So this is another book that I listened to on audio. It's another short one, but what it kind of lacks in length is really made up for in the punch that it packs. So we start out in Vancouver in I think like 1912, and then we also find ourselves in the book on the moon like 500 years from now. So it travels a lot in time and space. I just want to mention that I also read Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel this year, and between the two of them, I found it really difficult to choose. So that's another one that I would recommend. But I think Sea of Tranquility slightly pips that one for me. So this covers a lot of the same themes as Station 11. So there is a pandemic. There are like performances. There's a bit of time travel. There's composers. There's just a lot going on, but not in a way that's like convoluted or seems complicated or anything like that. It is told in shifting timelines and it is complex in a lot of ways, but really easy to follow. If something's too complex, I can't read it, so I'm not lying when I say that this isn't very difficult. It wraps up really nicely, and I love how this author manages to kind of include so many different POVs in her work without the characters seeming flat or without the plot becoming too twisty, too difficult to follow, too confusing. It is sci-fi, but it's also incredibly literary. I'm not going to say too much more about the plot because I just feel like it's one of those ones that you have to read. But to be honest, between Sea of Tranquility and also Station 11, I loved them both and I would recommend them both. So technically, I guess entry number 6 is kind of 2 books. That leads me into number 5 then, where I'm also slightly cheating because I'm going to include 2 books, but kind of 3. I just haven't read the third one yet. So those books are the Farer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. You have heard me talk about these books at length, to no end. You know that I love them. So this trilogy starts out with a book called Assassin's Apprentice, and I've read that, and I also read the following book, Royal Assassin. So these are fantasy books, but they are character-driven fantasy books rather than plot-based fantasy books, which is really interesting. We follow a young boy called Fitz, and Fitz is the illegitimate son of the king in waiting, and he ends up at the door to the king's keep. When he's a young boy, his grandfather brings him there and tells them that they can have him. So Fitz doesn't really have much recollection of his mother. She was there at the time that he was passed over into the castle. Because he is an illegitimate son, he isn't really drawn into the family and he is left to grow up as kind of a stable hand and to look after the animals. And Fitz has such a lovely relationship with the animals. I think that could be a lot to do with why I love these books so much. There's a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding between Fitz and the animals that he encounters. And if there's something I really stan and really love, it's animals being treated well and being treated with kindness and all of the things that they deserve rather than what they get in our modern world. Anyway, Fitz is never really seen as a true member of the royal family, which is sad, but I think he quite enjoys the little life that he has. So as he gets a little bit older, the king decides to take him under his wing a little bit, and Fitz is trained as an assassin, but Fitz actually has a little bit of magic in himself. It's innate, but there's a problem because this kind of magic is really frowned upon. It's not really something that people are allowed to admit that they have or that they can do. But then there is also another type of magic in this book, and it's a little bit different, and I'm not going to go into that too much. But I really find the kind of interplay of the different magic systems to be quite interesting. It's not like super in your face magic, it's just like slightly different than how things work in our world. I don't want to give too much of the plot away. It's quite political. There are some fantastic characters. There are some characters that you will hate, which of course means that Robin Hobb wrote them quite well. There's just so much going on here. I really loved them, and I'm going to recommend the whole trilogy, even though I haven't read the third book just yet. But so far, the writing, the plotting, the characters, the different POVs, everything that's going on, I just like chef's kiss. Amazing Robin Hobb. I'm so glad that Robin Hobb has so many books in the realm of the Elderling series, because I know I'm going to slowly make my way through every last one of them. And here's where I got a little bit like, oh, does this book go here or does it go here? In the end, I decided on number 4 to be Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. So I read this book early this year, and again, if you're here for a while, you've heard me banging on about it loads. So it's described as a high fantasy, low stakes book, and that is exactly what you get. So we follow an orc named Viv, and she has been like a bounty hunter for the majority of her life. She's getting a little bit older, she's tired of that life, her back is sore, she's just sick of it, and she wants to settle down and do something just a little bit easier, a little bit less stressful. She wants to create for herself a little community of friends. She wants to put down roots. So in a particular town, Viv has come across something called coffee, which of course we know very well, but in this world it's not very popular just yet. And Viv decides to move to this city called Thune and to open her own coffee shop. And what we get is the coziest, most wholesome, loveliest book. Not much happens, and it's so twee and so whimsical and so lovely. There is a little bit of romance in it, but not much. We have a little bit of conflict, but not much. It's just so sweet and so lovely. And of course, you're probably aware that there is another book by Travis Baldree set in the same world called Bookshops and Bone Dust that came out just last month in November. I've also read that. I didn't enjoy it as much, but I did really enjoy it. I just think Legends and Lattes for me was definitely a case of right book, right time, and I'll never not recommend it. It's just such a sweet book. And if you're in the mood for something just a little bit more laid back, a little bit nicer, if you want to immerse yourself in a world where bad things don't really happen too much, where people are kind to each other, where people make friends easily, this is a really lovely one for you. Number 3 is a little bit of a cheat for me again, because it's going to be a trilogy that I'm going to recommend. I just picked up the first book here, but I have read the 3 books in this trilogy. So that is the Poppy War trilogy, a trilogy that I'm sure you've heard me speaking about to no end again. So I read the first book in this series, The Poppy War, maybe a couple of years ago. And then this year I have been trying to read my series and finish my series a little bit more. So this year I read The Dragon Republic and The Burning God as well. And I think The Dragon Republic was my favourite book. So the middle book was probably my favourite book in this series, but I loved every one of them. So we follow Rin, a little orphan girl who has been taken in by a family who really aren't very nice to her, who make her work so hard. They work her to the bone. They don't expect her to really achieve much in her life, and they're going to marry her off eventually. And Rin is having none of that. So she decides her only way out of this life is to get this education, to try this test. And if she does well in this test, she'll get into this kind of military school. And she does. It's not really a spoiler because this is how she starts out. And there's so much to this trilogy. I'm not going to give away too much of the story. So she goes to this school and she makes some friends. So there's definitely a bit of a found family trope throughout this trilogy as well. But it's not sweet. It's not wholesome. It's really dark. It's a trilogy that really tries to show the realities of war and the realities of the aftermath of war as well. It's quite bleak. It's tough to read in parts, but there's so much going on. It's so good. The relationships are great, the characters are fantastic, the world building is impeccable. Like, R.F. Kuang, I don't know how you do it and how you did it, but this trilogy is incredible, and I'm so glad that I finally got myself around to reading it. Right, we're at top two. My number two is a really short little book by an Irish author, and that book is Foster by Claire Keegan. This book is so short. It is 88 pages. It's more a novella than anything. And you've probably heard me speaking about Claire Keegan before. Claire Keegan writes these lovely short little books. And these books are about the realities of the mundanity of our everyday. She takes stories that feel so real and she writes about them, and there's nothing fantastical about them, there's nothing strange about them. To me, they feel incredibly nostalgic because they're set in worlds that I grew up in, set in worlds that my parents grew up in. I recognise so much of it. I recognise the language, I recognise the slang, the types of people, the types of relationships. But anyway, I'm kind of getting aside of the whole point here. So this novel is about a young girl, and she is sent to live with some distant relatives over the summer while her parents are getting ready to have another baby. So she has some older siblings as well, but I think they just probably want a little bit of the pressure taken off. So she gets sent off to a lovely couple who live on a farm, and she spends the summer with them. And you can tell throughout the story that there is something a little bit sad underlying this couple. You know that something has happened somewhere along the line, but she develops this really great relationship with this family, and it's just about her summer on the farm and their relationship and how she gets on away from home. And I can't tell you just how perfect Claire Keegan's writing is. She writes like to the point. There are no words spared. She doesn't need superfluous language. She doesn't need all of these things that other authors use. And there's nothing against flowery language. I love flowery language. There's nothing against any of that. But there's something so sharp and so precise and so profound about Claire Keegan's writing. And I tell you, like, I love her work. And I can't wait to go back and to read the rest of her back catalogue. She's such an interesting woman to listen to talk to as well. So if there are any interviews or anything on YouTube with her, I recommend going to check them out. I'm so excited to read what else she reads in the future. She, for me, is definitely one of my favourite authors that I've discovered in the last couple of years. So yes, that is my number two. And so my number one top spot book read of 2023. I've spoiled this so many times because since September I've been saying that this is my favourite book of the year and I don't think anything could top it. And let me tell you, I wasn't wrong. This is my all-time favourite book of the year. And that is, of course, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. So I read this book in September, as I mentioned, and I had such a book hangover afterwards. Couldn't read anything. Didn't know what to do with myself. Didn't know how I was ever going to feel anything about anything ever again. It was such a smashing read for me, which is why, of course, it is my number one spot on this list. So we follow a group of 4 friends who meet in college. We have Jude, JB, Willem, and Malcolm. And wow. So this is kind of a contemporary literary novel. It's a really long one. I love a novel that really spans a lot of time, where you really get to know the characters, where you follow along with their lives for a really long time. And this book does that. So we follow these 4 men as they meet in college and throughout the remainder of the 4 of their lives. There are so many different POVs in this book, and it feels like really postmodern in the way that it was written, in that the author would be kind of telling a story and then there would be a story within that story, and yet everything wraps up and nothing feels confusing and the world is built so beautifully. So it is majority set in New York, and the sense of place here almost feels like another character. It is just, I don't know how she did what she did with this book, to be honest. It is an entirely character-driven novel. I still found myself enraptured with the plot and really wanted to know what would happen next. Honestly, like, I used to go to bed so early in the evenings so that I could spend hours reading this book. I read it within about the span of a week. I will mention, because I can't not mention, this book is such a traumatic read. There is every trigger warning on the planet in this book. Do not read it if you're not in a great place yourself, because it is so devastating, so difficult, so harrowing. There's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of self-harm, and I know that people have said that this book is literally nothing but trauma porn. And yes, I see this criticism. Totally, totally get that. But I personally feel as though there's so much more to this story than just like trauma porn. Yunagahara set out to write a story about a deeply traumatic and difficult life, one in which the character just doesn't catch any breaks, just doesn't get that much good, just doesn't really have the best time all the time. And I feel like so many books wrap up in a way that, like, oh yeah, and then everything worked out happily ever after the end. That's not the case for this book, and for one character in particular, he doesn't have a great time, and sometimes that's just real life. Sometimes people just get the shit end of the stick, and I really like how Yanagihara just kept piling it on. And I know a lot of people were like, this is so unrealistic, but sometimes people just have a shit time. Often people have a shit time, and we don't always have all of these great privileges. This particular character, while he's privileged in a lot of ways, he also has had things really hard, and I love how Yanagihara just didn't shy away from that. Like, she writes about it all with such precision. Nothing is held back. It is hard to read, as I've mentioned. Another criticism of Yanagihara's writing is that she writes stories about queer men, which she obviously herself is not. So this raises the issue of who should get to tell a story, which for me is probably an argument for another day. I do believe in kind of people writing their own stories, and for people from other communities to not be stealing stories from people. But I feel like if Yanagihara hadn't written this story, nobody would have, and I think that would be such a travesty. I'm so glad that it exists. In case it wasn't obvious, I have a really deep love for this book. I just felt completely and utterly immersed in it and enthralled by it while I was reading it. I doubt that I've ever cried as much while reading a book. I mean, my pillow was saturated as I was reading. I actually had to switch pillows one evening because it was just so bad. If you're here a while, you'll likely have noticed that I actually don't give out 5 stars all too often. But like, this book for me is 5 stars and then some and then some and then some. Usually when I rate a book, it's literally just kind of all vibes and how I felt, and so many things come into play. Like, I don't have a system where one book will kind of differ and like have a structured star rating. Sure, like plot, setting, character, pacing, all of that will be incredibly important when I'm rating a book, but usually it's for me how I felt at the time and how all of these facets kind of come together and how they affect me personally. And I suppose, to put it lightly, like, this book affected me. I'm not going to say it affected me in a really great way or anything, but it affected me. The writing, I don't know if I've mentioned that, is absolutely pristine. It's just so immersive. I cannot tell you, like, this was such a good book for me, and I'm so excited to read more of her writing as well. This book is huge for a reason, and I mean, not just because it's created such controversy about whether it should exist and so on and so forth, just because it's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so there we go. There you have it. That has been my top 10 list for the year. As of today, it is the 21st of December. I can't imagine that I will read any better books between now and then, but who knows. If I do, I'll let you know, of course. I want to thank you for sticking around with me for this year. This channel has been a bit of a labor of love for me. I started out here just to have something to do that was constructive and productive with my time, rather than sitting around in my own little anxious bubble feeling like anxiety and depression were going to kill me. And yeah, it's been great. I feel like you've all been so kind for the most part. You've been so lovely. I've loved having conversations with people about the books that they have loved. I'm not going to do a most disappointing reads of 2023 because I just don't really think it's fair. I haven't watched any of those videos. I haven't engaged with any of those videos because I will say it's so easy for me to sit here and say, I didn't really like that book. But how hard is it for an author to sit down every day and to pour themselves into a story and to write something so that we can read it, for us to turn around and just say, wasn't great. Okay, there are some books out there that we can objectively say are not that good, but I think for the most part we all have so many different opinions. We all feel so differently about things. We all relate to things so differently. I just don't like the idea of sitting here and absolutely ripping shreds out of books that I didn't like. There have been books that I didn't like this year. There have been books that I DNF'd, but that's okay. I feel like we're all out here doing our best. Another thing that I want to mention is I come to you this week with a really heavy heart. So you might be aware of my lovely little assistant Sally, my little dog. Normally I sit in her bed filming these videos and she lies on my bed while I film these videos. My little pup was put to sleep earlier this week, and to say that I am devastated is really an understatement. I miss her terribly. I love her a lot. It's so strange to sit here as a 34-year-old woman who has never in her adult life not had a dog. And the house feels so quiet and so strange, and I feel so weird not having her lying on my feet, snoozing away while I read my book. It's new. It's such a strange thing for me, and I just wanted to mention that because I feel like she's featured in my videos quite a bit, and I don't want to put a downer on the end of this video, but she's really important to me and I want to be transparent about how I'm feeling as well. I don't want to just come on here and be like, oh yeah, everything's great, I love books, and everything is great, and I do love books, but I also really miss my little dog. And for any of you out there, I just hope that like you just really give your pets a super little snuggle, and you know, that you pay them lots of lovely attention and that you're really kind to them over the rest of their lives, because they're not here for a very long time. And they're the best little things, and I'm so grateful, especially as somebody who's been sick for so long, to have had such lovely little dogs for 17 years of my life. My older dog was put down earlier this year as well, so it's a very strange thing to be going into a new year with just a cat. She's a lovely cat, but she's not my dog's, of course. That's where we're at. I feel really sad, so I might not have another video next week. I might give myself a break. So if that is the case and you don't see me next week, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for sticking around, for being here, for being so lovely, for appreciating me sitting here, usually in my dog's bed, babbling about words on paper. It's been great, and truly from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. This video I know is going out on Christmas Eve, so I hope for those of you that celebrate that you have the loveliest Christmas, even if that means just retreating into yourself, reading some books, declining invitations. That's me, no shame in it. I hope you have the loveliest time, and if you don't celebrate, I just hope you have the loveliest week. And if I don't see you next week, I'll see you in 2024. In the meantime, mind yourself, and hopefully I'll talk to you very soon.